Thank you to Sakuraco and TokyoTreat for sponsoring today's video. Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So I have had this drawing of Columbina kind of like sitting in my Genshin folder for a little while, probably literally a month ago. I think it was like on July 25th where I ended up drawing this one. Now, I initially planned this session to be for an ASMR video, and that's when I was initially working on this particular piece. But after like drawing her out, getting like the sketch, the composition, or whatever I wanted, doing the background, some of the flowers, I started coloring in her. I took a little bit of a break and then decided that I really disliked it. So we are going to be redoing this piece today. So right off the bat, to not kind of like start off too blindly, I did go back into my sketchbook to figure out how exactly I wanted to compose today's illustration, because even though I know color, I think, was the main issue with my gripes about like the current piece of Columbina, I think I want to change up the like kind of like the whole premise of the drawing. So we are going to be changing up the pose. I have two in mind. So the one on the very bottom here and the one that was like underneath that little sticker sheet paper. Also, I found it kind of fun to just take like a smidge of the backing of a piece of sticker paper, put it in as kind of like a little flap so that I don't actually have to cover up the entirety of my spread or my sketchbook page, and then I don't have to litter it with like too many sticky notes, if that makes sense, so that I can have like a full sheet once again. So that's just kind of like a fun way to give you extra paper in your sketchbook if you need to. Okay, so let's get on to the sketching portion. I've been enjoying this ink pen, or yeah, I think it's an ink pen. I keep forgetting to include it into the description, so I'm gonna go back into past videos to find where I got this brush from and link it into the description if you guys are interested. It's just been easier because it's been nice and light. I can kind of build up the value slowly, and I can just really kind of figure out the shapes rather than blocking in with that really dark kind of round brush, because I either get too simplified with my shapes and not enough detail before I actually start. And like, depending on what kind of person you are, maybe you want it more vague so that you can keep the general proportions more accurate. But for me, I ended up just liking using this pen a little bit more recently. Also, I ended up doing two sketches like I mentioned earlier. So the first one is actually kind of like a crouching sitting pose. She's looking more down towards the ground, and I want her to be like picking up something probably. And then this pose looks a lot like how I drew Misha and Fremine. So my initial idea, and I always love this concept of a person kind of like hugging a full moon, or I was thinking maybe even a crescent moon for her, and I'll just like fade out some kind of like light particles or like flower petals or something coming off of the moon to like hollow out that shape. But I don't know. I was not sold on that pose technically. I did really like it, but I think I wanted this one a little bit more. So I am going to be using this one for today's drawing. And I'm going to save the other one for a different Columbina drawing, potentially. Unless I find another character that's like heavily moon-coded, I might do somebody else. We'll see how this goes. And maybe I'll just do another Columbina drawing in the future. If you're interested in that, let me know and I'll definitely consider it in the future. But we kind of like dimmed down our sketch, and I'm moving on to our cleaner sketch, which I'll be using for the majority of my coloring. And speaking of coloring, I mentioned at the very beginning that the coloring, I think, was my biggest gripe about that drawing of Columbina that I did it back in July. And the reason why I didn't finish it is that sometimes I think it's faster to abandon the drawing if you dislike it. If you have a feeling you will not like it no matter how much you work on it. And that's gonna be something like it's gonna be hard to gauge for every person. It's gonna be different as well. So for me, I knew that if I put all this energy into rendering it and then I end up hating it, then I'm gonna be exerting too much energy to something like I know that I most likely will dislike. Because other than the coloring, the composition is just a little bit weird. Like, she's oddly cut off. And the amount of space that I want her to have on the edges might have benefited if she was more cut off like on the like I guess like the top and the bottom rather than on the sides, and maybe a horizontal composition would have fit better for the pose. This one, I did think a little bit more that I wanted to keep it very vertical for the most part and have less things kind of cut off. So the only things I would be okay cutting off is whether or not like her hair or like the flowers framing it or like fabric and stuff, but I don't want any part of her body or her face or anything to be too close to the edges where there's too much tension and it like feels oddly cut off, if that makes sense. I don't really remember, and I could easily just look back on the time lapse, but a good way of like, if you're not sure how you want your composition to be, other than like thumbnailing to get a feeling of the composition, drawing the pose like fully and then expanding it to the size of your canvas to see what framing you like the most is usually a good bet in terms of like, instead of just drawing the character in the space and like trying to crop it prematurely, because it just leads to a little bit of like awkwardness. Sometimes you're like preventing yourself from letting things extend off of the canvas, so you're trying to like scrunch them in. So I do recommend, if you can, either pre-plan your composition by doing thumbnailing or pre-plan by doing the entirety of the pose and letting things get cut off once you kind of like stretch and expand that sketch on your canvas to see what fits the most. And I know like I shouldn't really point out flaws in my artwork right away if you don't want to like draw attention to it, but this bothered me quite a bit as I was reviewing the footage. So unfortunately, a lot of the kind of fixes and adjustments that I need to make to Columbina later will not be shown in the video, but it'll be shown in the final artwork at the very end because I do correct it. But while I was doing the pose for Columbina, the one in my sketchbook made a little bit more sense, and in a way, I could have just like taken a photo of it, blown it up on the canvas, and just like redrew on top of it. But in this case, I accidentally turned her body, like her torso, more towards us and her legs in a different direction. So her body feels more twisted. So her thigh to bum area doesn't feel like it's really connected. So later on, when I finish coloring, I'm actually going to paint over a good portion of her, including her skirt and her thighs, so that it makes a little bit more sense the way that she's sitting. But for now, we're kind of just finishing up on the sketching portion, and for the most part, I'm a lot happier with what this looks like compared to my previous version. So for now, we're just going to leave the sketch as is, and we're just going to prep it for coloring, which I will actually start with the background as usual so we can get a good sense of the atmosphere. With the sketch done, let me show you some cute moon-related snack items via TokyoTreat and Sakuraco. Also, both of these boxes are my favorite box designs that they have during the year. TokyoTreat is a fun and exclusive Japanese snack box featuring unique and exclusive flavors straight from Japan. Each box is filled with a variety of full-size Japanese snack items like limited edition Kit Kats, uniquely flavored Japanese chips, and occasional Japanese sodas that are only available in Japan for a limited time. I mentioned earlier that these boxes are kind of like moon themed, as they are in celebration of Tsukimi, which is also welcoming the autumn moon during around this time of September. Well, Sakuraco is a monthly Japanese artisan snack box that supports local Japanese snack makers. Each box comes with 20 traditional, authentic, and artisan Japanese snacks, including Japanese teas and a special Japanese tableware. With a similar theme, there are a lot of rabbit and moon themed snacks for Tsukimi. Also, the tableware for this month's box is this beautiful and cute Tsukimi Yunomi, which is this embossed teacup. It also just has a very cute design on it, which I really love, and it's perfect for the autumn festival. Both of the boxes come with a 24-page cultural guide, and I love that it includes information regarding ingredients and allergens of each of the snacks, but also informs you of little tidbits of information revolving around culture and traditions in Japan. So if you're not really familiar with this time of year, it is right around the time for the Autumn Festival for many countries in Asia, more specifically Tsukimi for Japan, which I mentioned a little bit earlier in this little segment. Each month has a different theme, meaning that you get to try out a whole new selection of new treats and snacks every month. For example, TokyoTreat's box theme for the month of September is Snacktastic Moonfest, while Sakuraco's box for the month of September is the Autumn Moon Festival. I was super interested in the tea this time around, more so than usual, because I don't really remember drinking a 5-grain tea like this, and it kind of has more of that coffee-esque flavor in a way. So this is the Tsukimi Gokukucha, and it has a very nice strong aroma, and like I mentioned, it kind of reminds me a little bit of coffee, but it has nowhere near the similar taste. It just kind of has a similar smell. I personally really like the flavor of this one, and I wish I put it both in this cup and a lighter cup so you could see the rich color from it, because I think it actually looks really pretty. But for the snacks, TokyoTreat had a lovely Mont Blanc kind of Kit Kat, which I think is always like perfect for the fall season. It's just something about like that chestnutty flavor that I really love. But another favorite was these crispy seaweed bites. So they have really nice seasoning on them, but I love the fact that it has more of like that nice crisp texture and crunch to it because it's kind of like a battered piece of seaweed. I really love this one. Well, for Sakuraco, other than the 5-grain tea, which I think is like currently my new favorite, the salt, truffle, and cheese arare was actually very interesting. I'm not super used to eating truffle, but I think it paired really well with the slight sweetness of the cheese center. And I can never go wrong with the classic sesame senbei, which I always love any type of like rice cracker. But if you would like to get a box for yourself or want to give these as a lovely gift to your friends or family, then do check out the links in the description. Thank you again to Sakuraco and TokyoTreat for sponsoring today's video. So back to Columbina for some coloring. Okay, so now we can actually move on to the coloring portion, which we are starting off with the background like I mentioned earlier. And this way it gives me a little bit of an easier time finding more context for colors, but I am going to do kind of like an easier way to make sure all the colors kind of meld in a certain way. Sometimes if I feel confident with the lighting, I will do that right away for the characters coloring, but in this case, we're going to use a bunch of blend modes. But for that to work out well, I need to establish the background as much as I can. So I decided to keep it kind of simple. I think I do like the background for the first illustration a little bit more in terms of like the moon and the clouds and kind of like in a circular pattern. But this one I decided to keep it like as a mountain-esque landscape in the background. I added in the moon to kind of like behind her head so that she could be backlit. But initially in my sketch, I wanted her to be kind of like in a field of flowers where the inside portion of like a crescent moon shape would be carved out and have like either the flowers growing in that section or having it be blank so that I could leave something to glow in the same kind of crescent moon shape. But I don't think I really like that idea. It didn't really make sense. I feel like if I did it more as like she's floating in a more like space or like not on a landscape on a hill with flowers and stuff, then maybe it would work a little bit better just conceptually. So we are going to get rid of that little crescent moon shape that she's sitting on. But for now, I ended up going back to my old piece and pulling out kind of like the 3 layers that I had for these flowers and pasting them in to save me a little bit of time. Because I already got to a certain part of like coloring and rendering, so the flowers were like midway finished. I had ones that were pre-blurred to create depth, and then I had like a middle section where I was going to render as much as I could, and then I'll have another section right in front of her where they might be smaller but they're going to be rendered, and most likely I'll just copy and paste and try to create that kind of fuller look. But in this case, because I found that the framing of those little blue flowers weren't particularly tailored towards that old illustration, it still fit here as a way to frame Columbina in the piece. So I just directly took it because like might as well save work. No reason to redraw all those flowers when I wanted something similar anyways. But to kind of fill in the space where she's sitting, I needed to throw in a few extras. And this is kind of like the reason I chose the color palette as well, is that in a lot of the artwork, and I think it's like the little scenes that I've seen Columbina from like the official videos from Genshin and all that, has these like very vibrant kind of flowers that are of similar colors to like the glazed lilies. I don't really remember if these flowers are already introduced in the game as a flower, so I don't know if they actually have a name, but regardless, that's kind of like the main purpose of this very highly saturated blue night scene for the most part. But to kind of like finish off at least the general coloring for the background, I'm putting a drop shadow for where Columbina is sitting. I will eventually add a little bit of like grass, as well as we'll render out the flowers as much as I can so that it doesn't look too barren. And to do that, I ended up changing the line art for the flowers to be fairly light. I'll fill them in with kind of like our main blue color. I'll color in the center, Now, for my references, I don't know if I'm drawing these flowers technically correctly, which is why I think I kept them vague in the very beginning, but then I'm only referencing the old flowers that I've drawn. So if it's misinformation from the very first time I've drawn it, then I'm getting misinformation from my own self. So I only have myself to blame at this point. But you can kind of see I wanted to add little indication of like grass in some way. So I'm taking some of the lighter colors and popping it into the darker colors just to give it a little bit of sense of like texture of grass so that she doesn't look like she's sitting on a gradation only. And then after that, we move back into rendering our flowers, which the main thing I wanted to do is to get rid of any of these like purpley lavender light lines that I've had throughout the piece, because if I did want to blur them just randomly, these lines will show up quite predominantly. So I want to make sure that, you know, it looks clean from a distance for the most part. And if I have enough energy, I'll just like start to render them out and actually just leave them as is rather than blurring out everything where it low-key doesn't really make sense. Because I'm finding that more recently, and this might be another contributing reason why I haven't really started working on my flower zine for my OCs once again, other than just being busy with just sporadic things happening in life in general. But I've been having fun drawing flowers and coloring them, but rendering them, I don't know if it's just like it's taking too much of my time, so I don't feel compelled to do it at this moment. So maybe I'll just focus on doing more like flower studies in the meantime, and then once I get more pumped back into it, I will start to render them so we can get more finished illustrations for that OC flower zine in the future. But like I mentioned, I like establishing the background as much as I can prior to coloring in the character, especially if the character's color palette or the lighting situation is predominantly affected by its surroundings, which usually in the most part, like regardless if it is, I like keeping consideration the background color just to make things look a little bit more harmonious. Otherwise, like choosing a background based on your already pre-selected colors is also a nightmare. So I'd rather do that like all together as one thing rather than keeping them separate and having to fight it at the very end. I low-key almost forgot her mask. So after I took a break, I went to take a quick look at her to make sure that, you know, I didn't want to make any major changes yet so that we can start coloring. So for coloring, I already went ahead and blocked out pretty much the silhouette of Columbina in what I would consider kind of her base skin tone first so that we can start to shade. Now, I don't know if I'm going to talk about this in a future video, probably because I would like to give a better demonstration, but sometimes I've been doing kind of like duplicating my line art and merging it with my blocked in colors so that when I eventually merge my multiply layer, which has like my sketch with my colors, I will have less of those like random purple or really light lines on the edge of my characters, because any color that's like underneath a multiply layer that doesn't have anything laid down will revert back to like a normal layer because the effect has nothing to take effect on if it's just on something that's like blank. So for me, I've been trying to duplicate it to minimize the amount of cleanup, and for the most part I think it's been working. So maybe in the future I will show that off a little bit so that, you know, maybe it can reduce a little bit of your cleanup time if you like to work in a very similar process to me where you paint underneath a multiply sketch and color it to kind of like make sure you do all your painting and stuff before merging, and then you have like all these little scrappy little lighter lines everywhere throughout the piece, and you might have to go around the entire character just cleaning it up right away. But kind of talking a little bit about the first piece that I did for Columbina. So for that one, I was doing a little bit of back and forth of feeling confident enough to color her without using the blend modes right away, which sometimes it works out well, sometimes it doesn't. I think when I have like a heavy specific hue lighting, in this case it's going to be very blue. Sometimes like when I do night scenes I use purple, sometimes I just want to make it darker. Oftentimes if I'm doing like a warmer piece I can get away with it. And maybe like in the past I was a little bit more comfortable just picking like the skin tone that was correct for that lighting temperature. But for the Columbina one, I made her like too pink and darker rather than letting it be infused almost with the blue light. So like all the colors I was using on her just felt not correct. So in this case, while I'm coloring Columbina right now, I'm blocking it in her colors as if the background low-key doesn't exist. And then I will merge all my layers together. So this is my sketch layer and my color layers, so that I can eventually put a overlay or a multiply layer on top of her. So as of right now, I have kind of like this blue color on top of the entirety of her, and I'm gonna make some other adjustments. So because I don't want the skin to look too dull, I am going to go back in with an overlay layer and add in a passive orange. I'm gonna knock it back a significant amount just to give it a slight smidge of warmth to everything. I don't call this the Holy Trinity, but I oftentimes, especially if I'm doing like darker lighting or I want to change the color temperature a lot, the free layers that I use, and this doesn't have to be in a very like specific order, because sometimes I do switch the overlay to be either under or over everything, so it just depends. But I will add a multiply layer to darken the piece, and this usually puts the character into shadow, so this is great for backlighting, or if you want rim lighting or whatever, or if you want to have like shadows on one side of the character, you can block that in. After that, I will add in our stronger lighting. So I'll use an add layer, and then after that, I'll use an overlay. So I will almost always use a multiply, overlay, and add layer when it comes to like stronger lighting. Otherwise, if I don't have the need to adjust the colors in any way, then I won't use any of those blend modes until like the very end, where I might want to do slight color adjustments. But kind of with our blend modes all done, make sure to kind of like merge them in order. So if pretend I have my base layer, then I have multiply on top of that, I have overlay on top of that, and I have addition on top of that. Do you want to merge them in order from whatever's closest to your base layer? So I would merge my multiply layer to my base layer, and then I would merge my overlay to my base layer, then my add layer to my base layer. That way they all retain their blend modes effects. Otherwise, like if I were to if I were to merge my add layer directly to the layer below it, then it would be merging onto an overlay layer. So all of the effects of my add layer will then turn into an overlay layer, which is not what I want. So just be conscious of that if you're new to blend modes. So while I was on rambling about blend modes, we have moved on to our rendering phase. So rendering is, I think some people still get a bit confused about this because I do speed through my layers sometimes, especially for these types of videos. But if you want to watch me work on like longer sessions, I have a few start to finishes. I would like to do another one where it's like ASMR-esque again, but I want to do another one where it's like I'm talking through the entirety of it. So whenever I have enough energy and the time to block out to do that full session, I'll definitely do it again so that maybe we can talk through the entire piece or whatever a little bit more coherently at the time of drawing instead of like all this back end kind of hindsight, I guess. But what I was getting to is that for rendering, I do like rendering on one layer. I always get the question that whether or not I color on one layer, and to an extent I would say yes, but because I do rely on blend modes and stuff afterwards, then I would say no because I feel like color adjustments contribute to that in some sort. But for the base of my drawing, when I was blocking in the colors for Columbina without the blend modes, I did end up doing all the coloring on one layer, which has its benefits and, you know, its drawbacks, but that depends on like you as a person. For me, on Procreate or just working on the iPad, I don't know if it's because like there's no mouse or like the way the program is set, I don't like opening up the layers too often because it's hidden and I have limited space on my tinier screen, which I prefer still. I don't want to have the layers constantly open, so I don't want to keep going back and forth wasting that time. So oftentimes I just find it a little bit easier for me to block in and color everything all together. I just have to keep in mind kind of like a makeshift hierarchy in my brain. So typically I want skin or like anything that would be covered up by things to be the cleanest. So skin gets covered up by hair, it gets covered up by eyes low-key, and it gets covered up by clothing. So kind of thinking like a paper doll whatever's your base, I would start coloring that first. And as you move up in whatever is closest to the front will be colored in last. Unless you want to struggle with like making sure your colors are clean at the very end, you can definitely do that as well. Or just use multiple layers. When I was doing the colors for Columbina, I don't remember if I showed it. So I initially blocked in the entirety of her hair with the kind of like dark brown, but I forgot to do the gradient. So I made a separate layer on top of our already colored layer, or like our solid fill, and added in that little pink kind of highlight very softly to the tips of her hair. And then because it's on a separate layer, I can just go ahead and erase and clean up everything. Kind of similar here as well. It's like some of these layers like I will make on top so that I can just erase, and then I don't have to worry about, you know, budging already the colors that I already have laid down. But in a sense, I do use one-ish layer to do the majority of the coloring for the character. Then I'll go through blend modes, then I'll merge them all together. But before I do blend modes, I do end up merging my sketch and my rough colors together first, because I want the lines to take effect with the blend modes. But then after that, when I'm rendering, I usually also just do it in one layer. So I will just render on top of that merged layer. Unless I'm scared of something or I forget that I want to like erase to correct, then I will make a new layer to do that instead. And rendering, I don't know, because it's so straightforward to me and it differs from person to person, I apologize if I just talked my way through the entirety of it. Like I mentioned, I have other videos where I talk more thoroughly about my drawing process in more real time, so if you're interested in that, or I'll make like a new one in the future, either check back my old videos or look forward to that in the future. But I ended up adding one more layer of like colors. So this one is an overlay layer once again. I made it much more of an intense blue, added some kind of like green turquoise blues for the flowers and the moon and on top of her scalp, added a deeper kind of pinkish purple to her skin area, or just like her in general. And then I knock it back to, I guess in this case it's at about 15%. You can kind of see the very subtle color difference. It wasn't too drastic, so I ended up bumping it up more. And I think on camera, it looks way more intense. So feel free to check out the illustration at the very end to see what the colors actually ended up looking like. And before the video ends, let's talk about the pose again. So like I mentioned, the torso to her thigh bum area didn't seem like it was really connecting. So at the very end, I'm actually going to elongate her thigh area downwards and make it a little bit more straight facing rather than this weird angle, because it really does make it look like her torso is itty bitty, really tiny. And I don't think I fixed the torso too much. So hopefully it doesn't look too off after I tried to elongate her thigh-ish area. So yeah, I do end up making that adjustment. And luckily, like I said, because it's all in one layer, adjusting her in general wasn't going to be too much of a pain than going back through a bunch of different layers like line art, finding the different color layers to fix up everything. But I think that's about it. So kind of comparing my old Columbina to this one, color-wise, I'm a little bit more pleased with this one. The pose fits a little bit better for the composition, or like the paper type, if that makes sense. I feel like the other Columbina on the left would have benefited, like I mentioned, for like more of a landscape-esque kind of composition rather than this vertical one. But hopefully you guys enjoyed watching today's little video of me redrawing Columbina, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!